My name is Ben McLean, and I used to be with Section 31 until...
We got a burn notice on you. You're blacklisted.
When you're burned, you've got nothing. No starship, no replicator, no latinum, no transporter. You do whatever work comes your way, and you rely on anyone who is still talking to you. A technical guru who is informing on you to Starfleet Command.
Hey, a friend's a friend, even if he's being squeezed by the feds.
A trigger-happy ex-Maquis.
The Ferengi who sold me this Monopoly board promised me the get-out-of-jail-free card was legit. It's got to be, right?
A guy in a red shirt.
Hey, what could possibly go wrong?
If you're desperate. Bottom line is, as long as you're burned, you may as well do some Trekosophy, the Star Trek philosophy podcast. And today, we're talking about Section 31.
Again.
Yeah.
Well, attempting to recover from the last failed attempt at discussing Section 31.
Yeah.
It wasn't failed, it was sabotaged.
I was going to say, it wasn't a failure, it just succeeded in a way different than intended.
Okay.
Yeah, we ended up getting on a tangent about domestic surveillance of the citizenry, which really would make a lot more sense if we were talking about the hierarchy or something else like that. But this is Section 31, and we need to talk about Section 31. So, no domestic surveillance issues. We're talking about foreign policy issues today. How one nation spies on another nation and deals with other nations. And the question, and the episode we watched to prepare for this was Inter Arma Enim Silent Legis. I have no idea whether that pronunciation is correct. I'm not a Latin scholar at all, but that's Latin for in time of war.
You almost got it.
Inter Arma Enim Silent Legis.
Silent.
Okay.
I don't even think Admiral Ross got it right, but whatever.
No, he didn't. He got it terrible. He got it worse. He got it far worse than Ben.
Oh, okay. Well, the point though, yeah, I mean, I'm hooked on phonics. So this is a Latin phrase which means time of war, the law falls silent. And it relates to the Deep Space Nine plot that's going on in the episode, of course. But I think it's important to understand the context of this in ancient Rome. And basically, it was like this. The Romans were normally ruled by the Senate, and the Senate was democratically elected, but what Rome meant by democracy was that all the rich people could vote. So it wasn't an egalitarian democracy. It was an aristocratic democracy, or a democracy of the aristocracy. But it was an elected body of representatives who were senators that ruled Rome normally, unless there was a war that was going badly. If the war was going badly, the Senate would elect a dictator, and that is what they called them. They called them dictators. And the dictator would have absolute power. He would not have to deal with flack from the Senate. He would not have to deal with the judicial branch getting in his way. He would have absolute power in Rome with the directive to save the Roman state from losing the war, basically.
So he would have this power until the war was over?
Until the emergency was over.
Okay.
And they promised with a pinky swear that they would totally give all their power back as soon as the war was over. The surprising thing, the really surprising thing, which is almost an anomaly in history, is that most of them actually did. The Senate came back time and time again, even though they did have a temporary dictator several times. And of course, the greatest example of that was Cincinnatus, who was called upon to become the dictator of Rome, but went back to his plow. That was just an honor thing for the Romans. But the idea was that any unfair thing that the dictator had to do to save the Roman state from disaster was totally justified because they had to win the war.
Okay, so that was the origin of that.
That was the origin of that phrase. In time of war, the law falls silent. They would abandon temporarily their democratic institutions and pass all power into the hands of an absolute dictator. Now, the dictators weren't necessarily all that much worse than Rome was generally, because I mean, Romulan. That's the thing. The funny thing is, this is an episode in which we're negotiating with the Romulans, and the Romulans are totally supposed to be Rome. I mean, they just drip Rome from every pore, except that they're a little more philosophical than Rome. But still, they still drip Rome from every pore. Everything in the Romulan alien race is just straight Rome most of the time. Rome with spaceships is all they are. So, in the context of a conflict with Romulus, for Bashir to accuse Federation of being just another ancient Rome was really a powerful slap in the face to the Federation pride or whatever. You know what I'm saying? That was just, compared to the Romulans, we're like Rome in a bad way, That's like that was badass, okay? Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, Romulans are basically the Romes. They drip out of every pore that they're Romans. I mean, heck, even their name is obviously a takeoff.
And in the middle of an episode where we're dealing with Romulans, Bashir accuses the Federation of being like Rome.
When did he accuse them of being like Rome?
Towards the end, when he confronted Ross.
Oh, okay. And he didn't actually specifically say that. Did what you're saying?
Oh, he says, "What is this? Another Rome where everybody?"
Oh, I must have missed that part.
It's kind of the finale of the episode. He says.
Yeah, I just don't remember him saying, "What is this? Another Rome?" I missed him saying that. I must have been focused on something else.
Bashir says, "In time of war, the law falls silent." Cicero. So is that what we have become? A 24th century Rome, driven by nothing other than the certainty that Caesar can do no wrong? And then Admiral Ross just says, "This conversation never happened. You're dismissed." And then they pick up their badges. So that's what I've been talking about, is when he accuses the Federation of being a 24th century Rome in the middle of a situation where we're confronting the Romulans, he's basically saying we're worse than the Romulans.
So is Cicero the guy that wrote that phrase or something?
Cicero.
Yeah, Cicero wrote it as part of when he was working as a lawyer. He wrote it as part of a speech called Pro Milone, which was defending this guy called Milo from murdering his enemy, his political enemy. The Star Trek writers took that phrase out because it sounded good to them, and sort of shuffled it around a bit and made it into the episode title.
I'm glad you all are here to help educate me. I slept through history classes, so this is definitely a big help.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, translating Cicero is absolute murder. So hard.
Yeah.
Well, Cicero was like the Roman Shakespeare when it comes to how to use the English language. He did the same thing with Latin.
Yeah, except I think he's actually kind of a little bit worse than Shakespeare, because he puts things like the subject somewhere in the middle of the sentence and then the verb somewhere over at the very end, miles away, and then the whatever the noun's supposed to be doing is, basically at the other end of the football field or
Okay.
Yeah,
well,
so he's like the Roman Chaucer then.
Yeah, sort of.
All right. So
he's a bit mad
so on
with his
the
sentences.
issue of Section 31, and I think one important way to look at it is how it relates to real world history and politics. And I think the CIA in the United States has famously overstepped its bounds in a great many areas on a great many occasions, where operatives of the CIA have assassinated foreign leaders and supported rebellions or supported regimes in third world countries without authorization from the State Department or whoever is supposed to be in charge of that, because the operatives within the CIA had certain opinions about who the good guys and bad guys were that could certainly be questioned. That's an understatement. And I think Section 31 is kind of alluding to some of that history, that Starfleet intelligence, we want to assume they're basically the good guys because they're helping the Federation in an area where they do need to have an intelligence service. But on the other hand, it all this secrecy creates all these opportunities for abuse. And how do you deal with all of that? That's the question I'm wanting us to get to.
Well, I suppose I'm going to, even though I was never too big of a fan of any of the Federation intelligence services, because Starfleet intelligence is probably the weakest of any in the galaxy, I'm going to end up defending Section 31 in this case, because you say Section 31 or the CIA, they do things that would not be approved by the State Department. Well, that's why you have an outfit like this, because if the State Department could handle the situation, could do the right thing on their own, then it would be a State Department job. It wouldn't be a job for the CIA.
Exactly. You have to have someone to do the dirty work. The work that can be plausibly denied.
Well, the trouble is, who decides what ought to be done? It's not who's doing it, but the question of who gets to decide what ought to be done. We're supposed to, at least in theory, have a fundamentally civilian-controlled military and intelligence service. And when that totally breaks down because of the private opinions of the men and women comprising it, who unilaterally take upon themselves the responsibility that ought to belong to nations and elected leaders, you have, that can certainly be a problem. I mean, why do we have elections at all if our foreign policy can be decided by any operative who happens to work for our intelligence service? I mean, spies aren't exactly the most moral people.
I'm gonna lift this bit from Clausewitz, and I'm pretty sure he lifted it from Plato. There are some people who are cut out to make military decisions. You put them in the military, you let them make the decisions. There are some people who are cut out to make economic decisions. You put them in charge of the economy. If it's all about civilian oversight and you do what the civilians say, you end up with messes like Vietnam. That wasn't a flaw in the military or the intelligence services. It was the fact that they were told specifically what to do by people who didn't know what to do. So your job as the civilian leader of whatever government is to say, I need somebody who can do such things. I need to find the right person for that job. You're basically a glorified HR supervisor. It's not your job to make the tough decisions. It's your job to find people who are competent to make tough decisions. You have to understand how to hire people, not how to do things. If you knew how to be a military general, you'd be a military general, not the president.
Well, the president is supposed to decide whether to get into a war or not, and Congress, and supposed to get Congress's approval on whether to get into a war or not, and then is supposed to appoint competent generals to pursue the war, and how to win the war should be in the hands of generals. But so I think there's a legitimate distinction between which wars to get into, which wars to fight, and how to win. Which wars to fight is supposed to be above board and clearly within the purview of civilian leadership, while how to win the wars is supposed to be within the sphere of military and military intelligence. But here they are planning for the next war, but not just planning for it, but basically preempting it all on their own. as a rogue intelligence agency that really reports to no one, but just sort of leeches off Starfleet Intelligence's resources because there's so many secrets you can't get rid of them without exposing the rest of your secrets. It puts the decisions in the hands of a completely arbitrary power. Now, I get what you're saying about the sort of division of responsibility. Plato certainly does say that. It's what the Republic is all about. Although I've always read the Republic as being more of a primer of psychology than an actual a good political ideal. But if you want to argue that you should divide responsibilities and use the Republic, that is a legitimate use of the Republic, I suppose. It's just not one I'm particularly inclined to agree with Plato on. I mean, I certainly do believe in separation of powers, but not to this extreme. I mean, it seems to go really far there. On the other hand, what if Section 31 did have some way of reporting to the President of the Federation that actually did have some accountability instead of no accountability? Then you'd defend Section 31 with or without this, but I might be more inclined to be more sympathetic toward the cause of Section 31. That
if there was that kind of direct oversight by the Federation civilian authority, then Section 31 wouldn't have any of the successes it has. It would basically be another failed intelligence organization that the Federation is full of. Look back at In the Pale Moonlight and everything that Sisko did.
Sisko actually had the approval.
He did have some oversight.
Yeah, he did have some oversight with what he did there.
It was a rubber stamp. We don't want to know. Do whatever you got to do. That was his approval. So
but
basically,
it wasn't a rubber stamp for 200 years.
Yeah, that's the thing. Section 31 has been operating without any oversight for 200 years.
And has it accomplished its stated missions? The Federation's been here for 200 years, so I'd say they're doing all right.
That's
I mean,
still ever the pragmatist.
The one time you had somebody, the one time you had somebody doing something shady, the Federation gives Sisko that rubber stamp. Do whatever it takes. We don't want to know about it. That was their official stance for Sisko, and that brought the Romulans into the war and basically saved the Federation. Section 31's been doing the exact same thing for 200 years. So if they had stood around and waited for Starfleet approval for every operation they'd have, we'd all be speaking Klingon.
Well, if we live in the Federation, you mean?
Yeah, I'm paraphrasing and mangling some old metaphors and political cliches, but you get my point. We would have lost. The Federation is not a nation of warmongers. We don't build great warships. We build really, really lousy warships, but we have very clever people who are good at showing the initiative and coming up with neat ways to use the ships they have. We don't have a great spy organization. Not officially, but there are a handful of really talented people who are good at that sort of thing, who do it without being part of the Federation intelligence services, because Federation intelligence sucks.
Yeah, Federation intelligence always did kind of suck, but and there's a reason for that, which is the Federation has more scruples, and the implication of most spy fiction is that if you have scruples, you'll probably lose.
And typically that's the case. I mean,
the question is, at what point do you stop being the Federation and become your own entity, like the Maquis? Are the Maquis? I mean, you'd also defend the Maquis, wouldn't you?
I'd start to, but after a while, I'd say nuke them all.
Well, why not?
They started out with a legitimate mission, a legitimate purpose, a flawed treaty between the Federation and the Cardassians that was hurting the local population. Their mission was to stop the Cardassians from hurting the local population. That was their mission. At some point, it changed into, we're going to fight the Federation, and we're going to fight the Cardassians, and we're going to fight everybody because we're rebels, and that's what they do. and they lost sight of the goal. The difference between the Maquis and Section 31 is Section 31's mission's always been the same. Do whatever it takes to preserve the Federation. And they've never lost sight of that. The enemy they've targeted has changed, but the goal they were protecting has always been the same. At one point, the Maquis were no longer fighting for a cause. They were fighting to fight, and they went from being noble freedom fighters to being bandits, thugs, and mercenaries, basically.
Well, here, and I think this might be the central issue that Section 31 and the CIA raise, and that is, when do you stop being the Federation or the United States? At what point do you, the Christian saying from Matthew 16:26, also in Mark 8:36, and it is, "For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul?" And the question there is, it's very much connected with the question of identity in philosophy, and that is, when do you become so different from that which you set out to protect that what you are protecting is now so changed that it's no longer what you set out to protect? There's some point at which you've gone over the line where you just aren't the Federation anymore if it takes this much corruption to defend it.
And trying to defeat the monster you become.
Oh, yes. Nietzsche is also relevant here. That's a quote from Nietzsche. Or Nietzsche.
Really? Because I just made that up or pulled it out of.
Well, Chris,
I still got to say bullpucky to that whole thing, though, because nothing Section 31 does changes the Federation. It changes Section 31, but the Federation is still the Federation, because it's one thing to say, you become the monster. Great, you're fighting a wolf. Eventually you fight long, hard enough, and mean enough, you become the wolf. But you are fighting to protect the sheep. Is that sheep still behind you? If you turn around and try to kill the sheep, yeah, you're just another wolf. But if you're just a wolf who kills other wolves, you're
hold on, Bill,
some kind of crazy cannibal, but the sheep is okay.
I think we need to give Chris some bonus points here. He referenced, even though he didn't know where it came from, he successfully referenced Friedrich Nietzsche on the show. And it's actually a quote from Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. He says, quote, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. And when you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." And there's some stuff in Nietzsche that is very profound, and I think that's one profound statement in Nietzsche. I don't agree with Nietzsche generally, but if you quote mine him, you can find some gems, and there's a gem. It very much agrees with what I think Jesus said about losing your own soul. Now your counter argument, Bill. Can you repeat it? I'm sorry. I just wanted to back up and.
Well, I'm basically saying that Nietzsche is full of bullpucky on all this, and honestly, even the quote from the Bible is off, because in a nutshell. What does it gain a man to gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Sounds great. But for people like the guys running around in Section 31, they're not in it to gain anything for themselves. I mean, Bashir in this episode talks about the kids putting their lives on the line for the fight to protect the Federation. I'd argue that Section 31's taking it a step further. They're not just jeopardizing their lives. They're actually throwing their very souls on the line to save the Federation. Federation is saved, and the people in Section 31 are viewed as monsters and criminals. That's a heck of a sacrifice to make for the cause you believe in.
Yeah, but what is the definition of the Federation? What is the essential? We need to, I think, distinguish between essential and accidental properties. What is it about the Federation that makes it the Federation, which, if it was changed, it would no longer be the Federation, but would be something else?
What?
I'm asking you.
Well, I mean, I don't think it matters, because it's not about the Federation.
Exactly.
The Federation
It's not? I thought you just said it was. They'll do anything to protect the Federation.
They will. It's about them. The Federation doesn't change.
Federation doesn't even acknowledge their existence.
They're not a part of the Federation. They sacrificed their membership in the Federation to become a member of Section 31 to protect the Federation. So what the Federation is or does or changes into doesn't really have any bearing on what the guys in Section 31 do, except in as much as if it stopped being the Federation they knew and loved, they'd probably stop trying so hard to save it.
Well,
the Federation's not the one.
That's the question. What is the Federation that they know and love? What is its definition?
A peaceful, a government dedicated to the idea of peace and prosperity for everyone.
That seems incredibly vague. Wouldn't the Cardassian Empire claim to be a government that does that?
Everybody can claim to be a government that does that, but do they actually do it? There's the difference.
Well, yeah. How do you determine whether a government actually does it or not?
Through their actions.
And how do you determine which actions are the actions that does that?
What do you mean?
Well, there you have to have some kind of eventually you have to make some kind of moral distinction between the Federation as it ought to be and what we wouldn't accept or wouldn't want to protect anymore.
Okay.
And we're wanting to know, where do you draw that line?
I have no idea. Where would you draw the line?
That's the trouble with Section 31. They don't seem to have any idea. That's my objection to Section 31.
Section 31 isn't changing what the Federation does. Section 31 is changing what they do. Do you see what I'm trying to say? You keep saying, what is it that makes the Federation the Federation? Well, because Section 31 does this, the Federation isn't the Federation anymore. No, the Federation is still the Federation. Section 31 is no longer a part of that. They've sacrificed themselves at the Garden of Eden.
Yes,
isn't the Federation essentially complicit if they accepting and looking at Section 31? I mean,
no,
Section 31 is still a part of their charter, and they look at Section 31 and accept what they do.
I wouldn't
in
say
a
they're
sense,
complicit.
I'm complicit with them.
Well, they are complicit by the end of the episode we just watched. That's, or at least according to Bashir.
That was off the record, though.
Bashir argues they are morally complicit with what Section 31's doing. That's Bashir's argument.
Bashir is wrong.
Okay, so you're disagreeing with Bashir.
Yeah.
All right. I think Bashir,
but it is a
made
good
a legitimate point. Yeah.
It is a good point, but I wouldn't say the Federation is complicit in this. I mean, because honestly, the Federation is so good and so nice, they don't really have an ugly side anymore. They have a hard time even thinking of the ugly side. Go back and watch In the Pale Moonlight. And these two episodes compare and contrast beautifully, I think, Inter Arma and Pale Moonlight.
Well, Pale Moonlight is just after Inquisition, so yeah.
And what it boils down to is Sisko's like, I was willing to do whatever it takes. Sisko didn't know what that means. Did he complicitly agree? Yes, I'm going to set out to assassinate a Romulan. No. He figured Garrick was going to steal some information and plant some information. And he was like, I'm okay with him stealing information. I understand that's what it takes. And he thought he was agreeing to what he thought was a minor offense. And he finds out, he was planning on, killing a dozen people, blowing up a shuttle, assassinating an ambassador. Oh, I didn't think that was going to happen. There's a side to the Federation that's kind of naive, kind of out of touch and clueless. They're not evil enough to think evil. So you can say, that I agree to whatever. There's something out there so nasty, you didn't even think of it. So if you're not really thinking that's part of it, a blanket agreement, does that really mean you accept whatever or just whatever you could think of? I mean, where do you draw the limits on that?
Again, I go back to my 2-word phrase earlier, plausible deniability. It allows them, Section 31, to be able to do whatever they want. Federation looks the other way, doesn't even know what they're doing, supposedly at least. And then if they get blamed for it, they say, we didn't we don't know anything about this. We'll get right on it and try to find out more about it, and then quietly shuffle it away.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I think that the Federation, in its definition, had something about the way that a planet or group of planets relates to neighbors. In that, this whole idea of peace and the Prime Directive and all that kind of stuff is that the Federation seemed to have been defined by a certain moral code about foreign policy, about policy toward aliens. And the existence of something like Section 31 seems to involve taking actions that are antithetical to that definition, that are just the complete opposite of the kind of peaceful relations that the Federation seems to be comprised of by definition. And that, it just seems like such a contradictory thing for the Federation to have something like Section 31. Now you're saying, Section 31 isn't really part of the Federation. It's a totally separate entity. Well, for the Federation to require the existence of something like Section 31 in order to survive gives the lie to the Federation's philosophy. It shows that the Federation's philosophy is basically not true. And if the Federation's philosophy is not true, then the Federation is not something that is actually worth protecting.
But I would say that towards everyone else out there, it does look to be true. Because it seems to work for them.
It's not a question of it not being true. It's not being possible. The Federation is a BS pipe dream. It's not a real utopia. It strives to be a utopia, but it's impossible to actually create that kind of utopian society. So they really, really want it to be, and for 99.999% of the people in there, they can get that utopian dream because there is that tiny fringe element that rejects their own personal invitation to live in utopia in order to do the ugly things that make that utopia possible.
Yeah, well, it just seems like it can't be a utopia if this is true of it.
Well, it's not. That's why they have a Prime Directive to begin with. If it was really a utopia, if it was really the perfect society, then the Prime Directive would be immoral.
Oh, because we'd want to actually, if it was perfect, we'd want to force it on everyone?
If it was perfect and it solved all the problems, and you saw someone having a problem and did nothing to help them, then yeah, that's immoral.
That's a very good point.
How many people, well, we don't get involved in primitive societies because, if we gave them advanced weapons, they'll kill each other. They're a primitive society. They're killing each other anyway. Billions are dying and you'll do nothing to interfere. That's the Prime Directive for you.
Okay. Now, here's the question. Well, yeah, actually, never mind. The question I was just thinking of asking, I just realized it logically reduces to the same question I asked earlier, and I don't want to repeat myself.
Thank you.
So, yeah. So never mind. Sorry. Okay. So basically, let me lay out where we are and what our difference is. So Bill says that Admiral Ross is right, and maybe even Sloan is right, and Bashir is wrong, and doing things that seem to be normally unethical within the Federation's ethics are justified in order to protect the Federation, but only if they're done by people who are outside the Federation, basically because the end justifies the means. That's Bill. Bill is...
That's me too, I think.
Okay, Bill and Chris, the end justifies the means. And very Machiavelli. And I am saying that I think that the Star Trek writers, with what they were trying to present with this episode, which I think was aimed at trying to get you to agree with Bashir, were basically right. I think the Section 31 is doing something that is basically unethical, and that they ought to be hunted down, and basically that Bashir is correct, and I don't really need to repeat Bashir's speeches because he actually gets to preach quite a bit more than Section 31. So I basically think Bashir is correct, and I think we've had a good exchange, and I think this is a good episode of Trekosophy because what I really like is...
Well, let me clarify, too, real quickly here. I do agree with Bill. I agree with Ross. I agree with Sloan. I just wish I didn't have to. I wish that I was with Bashir on this. Bashir is an idealist. He even says so at the beginning of the episode. Guilty as charged. An optimist, the eternal optimist. I wish we could all be that way, but we can't. We got to wake up. We got to live in the real world. We've got to have a Section 31, unfortunately.
The part that Bashir is correct about is that what Section 31 does is immoral. He's right about that.
Absolutely.
Well, if it's immoral,
we're not arguing
if it's immoral, then people shouldn't do it. That's what immoral means.
Well, it depends on...
Yeah, immoral means it's a bad thing to do. But, yeah, I mean, ends justify the means. If there were no immoral people in the Federation, there would be no Federation. The only way to stop the Borg is to commit genocide.
Okay,
genocide is immoral.
There you go.
I think what you mean. I think what you mean is that you're a utilitarian, and that doing this thing which causes some badness is outweighed by the goodness it produces or happiness that it produces in the end. That's John Stuart Mill.
The badness. Or the badness done one way is preferable to the badness that would be done the other way. It's kind of like the old fight fire with fire.
So you think it minimizes
choosing the lesser of two evils?
Okay.
When an oil fire is going out, they don't use water to put it out. When an oil well is on fire, they use explosives. So, violence can solve your problems if used appropriately. And the problem is that most people don't know how to use it appropriately, so they just use a whole bunch of it and hope it works. Section 31 doesn't have a fleet of warships. They don't need one.
Mm-hmm.
So judge them all you want. You'll never see them try to stage a military coup or have a secret fleet of ships that they're going to use to unseat the authoritative power over a region like the Obsidian Order tried with the Cardassian Empire when things got too rough. Oh, yeah, we've got our own fleet of warships. Have a nice day. Yeah, Section 31 doesn't do that. They keep themselves small and isolated and have just enough resources to do specifically what they set out to do because just like Cincinnatus returning to his fields, in the end, they're not in it to take power for themselves and conquer the galaxy. They're only in it to prevent the Federation from being conquered.
Yeah. Well, I guess I can kind of see where you're coming from in some ways. You might score more points with me if you were to compare this to Lincoln. Because what Abraham Lincoln did during the Civil War was he suspended the writ of habeas corpus, which means the protection that prisoners that we arrest get, and various civil liberties of Southern sympathizers in the North during the Civil War. And he basically had to do that because otherwise we wouldn't have a United States. I mean, we'd have the Confederacy and the Northern United States and possibly have been reconquered by European empires. So he had to suspend some of our civil liberties in order to preserve the government that would, in the long term, preserve our civil liberties and even abolish slavery. So we'd have better civil liberties.
So you're looking
that's
at
Lincoln, and I think that might be a good analogy to this that might support your case, Bill.
But
Ash,
that's more in line with domestic policy. In terms of, I think Lincoln bears a closer parallel, I guess, with Section 31 and the way they operated in an episode like Inquisition, where they basically, kidnapping Bashir and interrogating him without, the rights of his rights as a prisoner were suspended and all that.
Where, when, what? I'm sorry, say that again.
I'm saying that basically that Lincoln's suspending right of habeas corpus and prisoners' right to a trial, right to fair this, fair that, and has probably a closer parallel with Section 31 and their behavior towards their own citizens in an episode like Inquisition, where they captured Bashir and interrogated him without telling anyone that that's what they were doing.
Well, I don't know, because what Lincoln did was basically suspend some of the protections of our ordinary Constitution in order to preserve our Constitution, while in Section 31 wasn't making a general policy. They made one specific arrest. Lincoln.
But it was. But that arrest was part of their general policy. I mean, remember they had done the same. They would have done the same to other people, and quietly disappeared them.
Yeah. Well, also Lincoln was trying to suppress the spread of certain ideas, which is really ominous.
Yeah, that's the part that kind of you seem to be implying you support what Lincoln did, and your initial argument about Section 31 is what they're doing is wrong because they're fundamentally changing the very nature of that which they're trying to protect. But the difference is Section 31 people, they drop off of the grid. They are no longer Federation citizens. They no longer exist. Lincoln retained his seat of power. He remained the president of the U.S. Now, if Lincoln had resigned as president and created this rogue operation to do what needed to be done to help win the war, it would be a closer parallel to what Section 31 is. Section 31, relative to Lincoln, they have the moral high ground because they're not dragging the whole Federation down with them. They're only getting themselves dirty.
Ooh, don't know about that.
Section 31 came awfully close to dragging the whole Federation down with them on a lot of different occasions, especially in the episode we're watching. Right, we watched for today. They almost destroyed the Romulan Federation alliance, which almost ended up having the Federation lose the war with the Dominion, all over the idea that we might possibly get into a war with the Romulans at some future date after winning the war with the Dominion, on the assumption that we would win the war with the Dominion. And
Except they
that
didn't.
is
Almost.
really
At what point does that become a
far-fetched.
At what point does that become a self-fulfilling prophecy?
Actually, I don't think that's what happened. Everybody looks at it and thinks that's what happened, and that's why they hate Section 31, but these guys were manipulating the outcome of everything from the beginning. And in the end, it was like Sloan says, gee, doctor, thank you very much for your help. Everything went exactly according to plan. So they were, I don't think it was a question of, they got lucky that the alliance didn't fall apart. They meant to push things to exactly that point so that the quote unquote good guys in the Federation could be seen to be good by saving that alliance. Everything they did went exactly according to plan and accomplished exactly what they set out to do. It wasn't a question of, it almost went too far. It went exactly where they wanted it to go because the alliance didn't crumble, and they knew it wouldn't because they knew how Bashir would react from the beginning.
Because he's so transparent. What about you, Ash? We've heard from Bill, Ben, myself. Where do you lean on this ends justifying the means argument?
Well, I think I drew a couple of parallels in this, and the first one was when you were talking about Plato. I actually looked up. There was a period in history just before Plato was born, just after the Peloponnesian War, and there was a period in history where the Athenians and the Spartans were fighting. And at one point, the Athenian democracy actually took out this thing called the Megarian Decree. And what it meant was they thought the people in Megara, which was another state of Greece, were being rebellious against their Athenian empire. So the Democrats in Athens basically voted to wipe out the male population of Megara, or basically, destroy Megara. And at that point, there were several occasions during that where I think it was actually democracy gone mad and oversight gone mad. But the other parallel that I would draw, and I think it's sort of doubly relevant in this case because Alexander Siddig is also featured in this one, is that the movie Syriana has several interesting parallels to the idea of espionage gone mad, and at what point do you take it too far, trolling over foreign policy or foreign countries' policy for the sake of your own interests, and
Yeah.
basically
And
The last one I'll leave you with, and then I'm going to stop talking because I got to head out the door. If you've seen the movie Serenity, the Joss Whedon Firefly movie, it's worth watching just to examine the bad guy in that film. At one point, he's told by the hero, all this horrible things you do to create this perfect world, doesn't that undermine it? And the guy's like, no, it really doesn't. He says, I know there's no place for me in the utopia I'm trying to create, but even though, I condemn myself to hell for doing it, what I do is still worth it because it will create that utopia. And that was the guy's, I'm paraphrasing badly, I'm sure, but if you watch Serenity, you'll see the bad guy's motives explained for why he does everything he does.
Yeah.
But I do actually, I do actually admire Bashir in this episode to an extent because, it's hard to keep your sense of integrity in the face of all that. I mean, he goes through an awful lot, and still to say, no, I don't want to cross this line. I don't want to, be like these people. And he's not one of those whose eyes are closed, in a sense.
No.
Yeah, and I mean, doing whatever it takes to keep your country safe, Bill, I just want to know, did you order the code red?
You're damn right I ordered the code red. I eat breakfast 300 yards away from some Klingon who wants to destroy your way of life.
Okay. So we basically had our own version of the whole A Few Good Men thing here today.
But that actually is a good way to close it, because the Federation is the person who really can't handle the truth.
That's right.
So
that's what Garrick thinks anyway. Thanks for listening to another exciting episode of Trekosophy, the Star Trek Philosophy Podcast. You can visit us on the web at trekosophy.com. That's TREKOSOPHY.com. And also at facebook.com/Trekosophy and twitter.com/Trekosophy. You can email us at trekosophy@gmail.com. Please leave us a review on iTunes and tell us what horrible, terrible philosophers we are and that we're not funny at all when we try to make jokes. Ask us questions, donate to our PayPal to buy us better microphones and stuff, and pay Chris for his keeping the site online, and I'm sure he can use the excess profits to fund space travel. Join us next week, and I'd like to thank Chris McGee, Bill Allen, and Ash Hume, which I'm always thinking she's related to David Hume, and after, no, she's not.
Well, Dr. David.
And thanks very much. We'll hopefully see you all next time. Oh, and thanks to Chris for editing this. I mean, that is a lot of work.
You have no idea.
Probably.
Yeah, and
get some idea.
Yes, and
yeah, he does.
Come back next week only if you think that you can handle the truth.
Actually, in 2 weeks. We're not doing it weekly.
Yeah. Next time.
Bi-weekly.
Next time, if you
next time
think you can handle the truth.
enjoying the dog's dinner?
Yeah. Yeah, they're in their play mode. They're all excited. They should be settled down by the time Ben gets here.
Yeah, Ben's a downer for everybody, isn't he?
It looks like I'm gonna have to jump.
I think.
So, what'd you think of the acting in this episode? Rough. Yeah, Shatner tended to be a little rough, didn't he?
And even Chris made a Nietzsche reference. I mean, you're totally soaking up the philosophy, Chris.
Yeah, I think I see a dip in the temperatures in the forecast for hell right now.
Yeah, I saw there was no blooper. I didn't know if it was a time thing or if they're just not funny.
They're not funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry it took me so long to get here. I got back, but then I was really needed to take a shower before I could carry on to the Trekosophizing, because it's not Stinkosophy.
A little bit of jiggery pokery, huh?
I'm playing with my widgets.
Oh, do I have to start reading the whole, Okay.
Well, you could just think it, but it's not going to get recorded.
Trekosophy.